I literally only wanted to brag about having more stand-up shows at the beginning of the episode. I didn't know we were going to get into this big conversation.
You don't have to explain that to me. Like, I've been around you a long time. I know your motives.
Welcome, nerds, to another episode of the Nerds You're Looking For podcast, a weekly nerd culture podcast that discusses the culture through various segments. My name, of course, is Patrick Kuhn, alongside my co-host, as always, that Tyler Hunt. How's it going, man?
It's going pretty well, man. How are you?
I'm good. It's kind of been a busy week for me. I don't know about you, but I haven't done stand-up in a while, and I have a couple of shows that are coming up that I'm really excited about, especially the one that's coming up this Saturday. That is actually at a comic convention, which I've never done a show at a comic convention. And I'm pretty excited about it because I've been told to do nerdy stuff, like to do nerdy material. And I've had a couple of jokes that I've written in the past that I never thought to use because if nobody gets the reference, not that they're super deep digs or anything like that, but yeah, I just thought that maybe if people didn't get the reference, then the joke would just fall flat. So I'm pretty excited about it. Like, I've had to write a bunch of new material that I'll probably only ever use at this show or shows like it in the future. Hopefully I have more of them in the future, but I've been really kind of busy just trying to sit down and write more material for that show.
So I'm familiar with the con that you're doing this at, and I know that it's pretty much exclusively anime-related stuff that goes on at this con. So I think the one thing that you're going to have to be careful of is that the people that are going to be watching you are going to be way super nerdier than you. So you're going to have to go with some deep cut stuff.
Yeah, and I've thought about that, and I don't know. I feel like if you're into anime, you're probably also into some of the stuff that I'm into too. Like, at least you're familiar with it. Because I think that's the thing that has stopped me from doing some of these jokes in the past. Because if you're not familiar with this thing, then you're not going to get the joke at all. Like, it's definitely something that you have to be familiar with whatever I'm talking about. Just any joke. I mean, whether it's nerdy or not, you have to be familiar with the concept. If you're not, you're probably not going to get the joke, or at least you're not going to appreciate it as much as somebody that does understand the reference. So I'm hoping all my material that I've written so far has been written in the hopes that at least you'll understand it somewhat because you are a nerd. And if you're nerdier than me, hopefully I'm counting on the fact that you get the reference. At least you understand where I'm coming from. Like, I have a joke about the DC movies and stuff like that. Like, I think that's universal. I mean, among nerds, like, even if you're big into anime, I still think that you've seen Justice League.
Yeah, I don't want to like generalize here or completely alienate a group of nerds that listens to our podcast, but for whatever reason, I've always found that nerds that are predominantly into anime are more judgy than other nerds. And I don't know if maybe that's just the people I've encountered in my life, but I feel like, I'm a pretty nerdy guy. I mean, we do this podcast. I love lots of things that are considered nerdy, but whenever I have conversations with people that love anime, I feel like I'm consistently being judged because that's something I don't know a lot about. So maybe it's just self-esteem issues or something, or insecurities, but I always feel like they're a little bit judgier than comic book nerds, which might be completely off base, but that's something that I've kind of picked up on.
And I think that's a problem in general. Like, gatekeeping in the nerd community is pretty bad. Like, I usually try to be pretty open to other things. Like, I mean, I'm just not into anime. It's just not my thing. That doesn't make it bad. It doesn't make you less of a nerd or anything like that. It's just not something that I'm into. And there's people that are into other things that are kind of adjacent to the things that I like, and I consider anime one of those things. It just means that nerd culture is really expansive, and that's awesome. I just think that gatekeeping in general is pretty shitty.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. Like, it's impossible to be into every single thing that would be considered nerdy and part of nerd culture. So the better that we embrace it, the better off we are, for sure.
For sure. And I literally only wanted to brag about having more stand-up shows at the beginning of the episode. I didn't know we were going to get into this big conversation.
You don't have to explain that to me. Like, I've been around you a long time. I know your motives.
All right, man, let's just jump right into it. If this is your first episode, we break each episode down into segments. In the first segment, we just kind of like checking in with each other, see what we're up to, and we call it what we're into. So what are you into this week?
I recently watched a 2017 movie that I wanted to bring up in conversation here because I was completely blown away by it. And that movie is The Florida Project. So this movie's set over one summer and follows Mooney, who's a 6-year-old girl that lives in a motel with her mother, Haley. This is a budget motel that is located outside Orlando. So it's located basically on this strip that caters to Disney World tourists. And, you know, Walt Disney World might be the happiest place on earth, and it's a place that I love going to, but this movie definitely shows a different side of things, and especially like the culture down there, and gives a glimpse to what living in that shadow can be like. And one of the things about this movie is that it's painfully real. And the fact that we see some pretty tough realities through the eyes of a 6-year-old child is part of what makes it so unique. It's extremely effective in its storytelling in that regard. And it's interesting that Mooney doesn't realize how bad some of the things are that's going on around her because she doesn't really know any better. I mean, she's only 6 years old. That's all she's known as she's grown up. So she doesn't really think anything of it. It's an amazing portrayal of childhood. And I think the child actors are one of the main reasons that I was so sold on this movie. We talk about it almost anytime we review anything that involves kid actors, and we've said a lot of times that more often they're bad than not. And I don't know, it seems like the kid actors in this movie, it doesn't even seem like they're acting. It just seems like they didn't use a script and they followed these kids around with a camera and told them to say things here and there, but just captured kids playing together. And I don't know, it resulted in some of the best acting I've ever seen by a group of kids either way. Speaking of acting, I also wanted to talk about the actress that plays Haley. Her name is, I'm gonna fuck up her last name because I've never heard it pronounced, but her Bria Vinite. And apparently, like, I looked up her IMDb, she's never really been in anything. This is her first acting role, and the director found her on Instagram, which sounds super shady. And, you know, I think Instagram people that have like this following there's like this stigma around it, but I don't know, man. It was hard for me to believe that she's never acted before because she holds her own in this movie and does a really great job and stands toe to toe with Willem Dafoe, who plays the manager of this motel that Haley and Mooney are living in. And of course, he was nominated for Best Supporting Actor for this performance, which was well deserved too. I mean, he was great in this movie, needless to say. But honestly, I'm surprised this movie didn't get nominated for more at the Oscars besides that Willem Dafoe nomination. In my opinion, it was one of the best films of last year, and it's an amazing representation of where we're at now culturally, I would say. So, you know, it's not necessarily like a super feel-good movie. Like, there are some harsh realities in it, and the end of the movie is amazing. I will say that. And you know, it's definitely heartbreaking at times, but I would definitely recommend giving it a watch because it is unlike most movies I've ever seen.
Yeah, I've heard really, really good things about this movie, and it was one of the movies that I was hoping to see before the Oscars, but then when the nominations came out, and like you said, they didn't really get nominated for a ton, so I was like, oh, well, this is one that I can kind of wait until later, and I just haven't gotten around to it. I will say that I was born in Florida, and I've gone back several times since. I don't really remember it. I don't remember it at all because we moved when I was like 3. So, I mean, obviously, I don't remember any of it, but we do go back quite frequently, and kind of seeing it through the lens of an adult, it is kind of shitty down there. Like it's pretty nice around Disney World, like you said, but yeah, it's pretty shitty. Most of the places that you go to in Florida, like we would go to spring break. We would go to Florida for their spring training. I'm a big Pirates fan, and they play in Bradenton, Florida, which is kind of a little bit of a shithole in Florida, but like I said, you can kind of say that about almost anywhere in Florida. But yeah, so I've been there quite a few times, and yeah, it's definitely weird having this huge thing, Disney World, in a place that's just kind of surrounded by weirdness. And I mean, there's Twitter accounts from people in Florida, like satire, like the Florida Man and stuff like that, just like tweeting weird shit that only happens in Florida. So it's definitely an interesting place. But I definitely relate to a lot of what you said about like not understanding as a child how, like the harsh realities of certain situations. Like I think I've talked about this a little bit before. Like when I was growing up, we were super, super poor. Like when we lived in upstate New York, we were really, really poor. And I just didn't understand it until I grew up, like how poor we were. Like it never occurred to me because I was a kid and it didn't matter because I got up and I went outside and I played or I went to school. So I was outside or I was at school most of the day. So it never really occurred to me how poor we were until I grew up and we kind of got out of that situation. And movies like this are definitely something that I am interested in.
Yeah, so I would definitely give it a watch if I were you. Like, off the top of my head, I would have taken out The Post and Darkest Hour for sure and nominated this movie before either one of those movies for Best Picture, because it was, I don't know, it was unlike anything I saw last year or that I've ever seen, to be honest. So definitely some good stuff that you should check out.
All right, man.
What are you into?
I am into a new game that I just started playing a couple of weeks ago. It just became available through Xbox's Game Preview. I guess it's on Windows Early Access if you play on PC as well. It's called Darwin Project, which if you haven't catched any of my streams yet, I've been streaming this game a couple of times a week for the last couple of weeks. And it's basically this battle royale mode, which I know is pretty popular right now, but it kind of takes stuff from the battle royale games that we've already had, but it's done in a way that is very unique. And I think that's what you kind of have to do now that Battle Royale mode is becoming so popular, is you have to do it in a way that's kind of your own. And this game definitely does that. Basically, the way that I've described this game to other people when I'll mention it is it's Fortnite, because it looks a lot like Fortnite. It's Fortnite meets The Long Dark, which is a game that I really like, meets The Hunger Games, and I'll explain each one of those things. So like I said, Fortnite, it looks a lot like that game, like as far as the animation style is concerned. You have to harvest things like you do in Fortnite. However, you don't actually really build much like you do in Fortnite. You do build like traps and stuff like that, and you can kind of upgrade your armor and you can upgrade your boots and stuff like that. But you don't build structures like you do in Fortnite. So it's a little bit different there. It meets The Long Dark because it actually has like a survival aspect to it. A big part of The Long Dark, basically most of The Long Dark, is essentially you're lost in northern Canada and it's freezing cold because it's northern Canada and you have to survive. Well, Darwin Project is exactly like that. Like you get dropped in and you actually have to survive the elements while you're also fighting these other people, which is something that isn't part of Fortnite. So it definitely separates itself that way. And it meets The Hunger Games because it's almost exactly like The Hunger Games. Basically, you're a prisoner and there's 9 other prisoners that you're playing against, and you get dropped in and you have to find creative ways to kill them and basically be the last man standing. But there's also a showrunner that plays with you, which is really fun to play as. It takes a little bit longer to find a game when you're trying to play as a showrunner, obviously, because if you're just playing as a contestant, there's 9 other people that you can play with, but when you're the showrunner, it's just you. So it's a little bit longer to find a game. Usually when I stream, this game. I will play like one game as the showrunner just to kind of mix it up, but it does take a while to get the game. It's really fun. I thoroughly am enjoying it. I think there's some stuff that need to be improved on. I think there's a lot of different places that they could go to. Like, people are already comparing this game to Fortnite, and they're like, oh, well, it's not as good as Fortnite. Well, I mean, Fortnite's been around for a while, and it's had opportunities to add things and tweak things. And I think Darwin Project has the potential to be just as cool because, like I said, it has other aspects to it that are pretty cool. I think that they could definitely improve upon the showrunner part of the game. Like, I don't know if a lot of people like playing as a showrunner as much as I do. I think it's really, really fun to play as a showrunner. I like to fuck with people, and it's a lot of fun. And they actually have this part of the game, like at the end of the game, where you can actually rate your showrunner, and it's almost like an Uber driver. Like, if your rating goes down too far, you can't do as much during the game. So I think that's pretty cool that they put that in there just so people can actually be held accountable for some of the shitty stuff that they do in the game. But yeah, it's really fun. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Like I said, I hope that they kind of improve upon a few things here and there. But so far, I've been really impressed at how smooth the games are. It doesn't take a ton of time to find each game. I haven't seen a ton of glitches in the game so far. And so far, I mean, I've been really, really enjoying it.
Yeah, I saw that you had streamed this or had been streaming this the last couple weeks, and it piqued my interest because typically you play some pretty cool things, and I hadn't heard of Darwin Project until you started playing it. And I'll be honest, like yesterday, I had a little bit of downtime and I almost downloaded it. I think for me, though, you and I were talking a little bit before we started recording, but with this battle royale aspect in games, like, I don't want to just play anything that has a battle royale, feel to it or gameplay to it. I want to make sure that games are taking that concept and are doing unique and fun things with it. And it sounds like listening to you explain Darwin Project, that this game is a lot different from Fortnite and the survival aspect of it. But yeah, I'm going back and forth because Sea of Thieves comes out soon and I might play that. And it just sounds like I need to make some decisions about what upcoming games I'm going to play next. Because, I pulled the trigger on Monster Hunter, and I talked about that a couple months ago on the podcast and never got into it. So that was just kind of a waste of $60 on my end. So I want to make sure that I'm being pretty thorough with the decisions I make because I don't have a ton of time to game anymore. So anything that I do play, I want to be really invested in.
Yeah, for sure. And I can definitely second the Monster Hunter World thing. I bought it because you were playing it and it sounded pretty cool. And then when I actually started playing it, I was like, I don't think this is for me. To be honest with you, like, I think you have to be really into those games to like Monster Hunter World just because it's very tedious. Like, you're hunting this creature, first of all, and we kind of talked about this a little bit when you brought it up. It feels weird because the thing is not doing anything wrong. Like, it's not hurting anybody. You're just fucking hunting it to be an asshole. So there's that kind of bothers me. And it just takes so long to kill it. Like, you'll find it, you'll track it, and that's pretty cool that you can actually like physically track it and you get its footsteps and all that good stuff. And then you start to kill it and it fights back, and that can be fun, but it's pretty tedious because you only have a certain amount of moves that you can do, and once you kind of run out of those things to watch those things, you kind of get tired of it, and then it'll run away, and then you have to track it again, then you have to start to kill it again, and then it's going to run away and you have to track it again, and it just takes so long to kill a thing that it just, I don't know, it just is not for me, for sure.
No, right there with you, man. It's not what I expected. Like, if you explain that out, if you explain the concept of the game out, it does sound like a lot of fun, but there's a lot of layers to that fun. And like you said, there's certain points in the game where you just feel like you're beating on some defenseless creature, and that's not really how I want to spend my time. So more power to the people that have gotten into that game and are really good at it. But yeah, for me, it was a waste of $60.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I'm right there with you. So our next segment is just plainly called Comics. Tyler and I read a ton of comics each week, and we like to spotlight one or two. So what'd you read this week?
I read New Mutants Dead Souls #1, and that is because I have not been able to go to the comic book store, and I needed to read something for the podcast this week. So just to give you a glimpse into how unnerdy my week has been, that is the only reason I'm talking about this comic this week, is because I was basically, my schedule forced my hand. So this book is written by Matthew Rosenberg, and it was drawn by Adam Gorham, and it's the first issue of a 6-issue miniseries. I was pretty hesitant going into this book. Like, if I had gone to the comic book shop, this would have not been something I picked up, because I believe that the New Mutants the movie The New Mutants that got pushed back to next year, its original release date was April 13th of this year. Again, until it got pushed back to last February. So this is, I mean, we've talked about it on the podcast before, but this book was basically going to be a cash in on that. And I'm curious if it was shortened to a 6-issue miniseries when they found out that the movie was switching release dates. And I wouldn't be surprised if January next year there's another New Mutants book that comes out to kind of capitalize on this movie, like this book was originally supposed to. So, I mean, all of that puts a bad taste in my mouth from the get-go. But the New Mutants idea of it and those characters definitely piqued my interest enough to give it a go, because I do think that those are an interesting group of characters. And at the end of the day, I should have listened to my initial instincts, because this book was not very good. This issue takes place mostly in a small Alabama town where a hurricane has left the town in ruins, and immediately after that, the dead start to rise and zombies are terrorizing locals, and the New Mutants almost immediately show up to see what's going on. And from their dialogue with one another, we find out that these mutants have graduated from Xavier School and are no longer training to be X-Men. They're pretty much out on their own. And this might be a small spoiler, but we find out that they're like this reforming of the group isn't like the Avengers getting back together, or, superheroes reforming a super group. This is just new employment for them, which takes away some of the heart of what's going on in the story. These characters basically now work as a mutant squad that are sent to investigate paranormal issues, hence the zombies. So, speaking of the zombie plot point, it's pretty dumb, if you couldn't tell by me saying the word zombies for a Marvel comic book that's not Marvel zombies. They explain the situation away like through the story, and that's all fine and good, but it was still a really weak plot point here in the first issue. The worst part of the plot, though, in my opinion, is that it was really, really boring. Everything else aside, like, it just wasn't fun to read. Like, you take the zombies out of it and the characters out of it, it was a boring book. And the one good thing I would say about it and about the writing is that the characters have really good banter. Each character has a unique voice and they play off of each other really well. But besides all that, there wasn't much I enjoyed, and I can't say I'd recommend the book. The art was fine, but I mean, it wasn't special enough to kind of save anything that was going on with the plot. So yeah, I would skip this book. I think that it's going to come and go pretty quick since the New Mutants movie got pushed back, and hopefully they take that time to make whatever New Mutants book they launch next year around the movie release really good, because this is not.
Yeah, I didn't even know that this book was coming out, and then you had texted me earlier this week, because sometimes we read a lot of the same stuff, and we kind of have to call dibs on certain things if we're afraid that the other is going to read it, just because we want to talk about something different for the sake of conversation. So yeah, when you texted me that I was just like, I didn't even know that was coming out. So you're good to go, man. So yeah, I actually read.
So I mean, it doesn't.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to go into what I was going to talk about, but that's cool if you had something else to say.
No. I was just going to say that I doubt. I mean, it sounds like you weren't going to pick up this book anyways, but once you heard that there was a New Mutants book, if you thought about it, yeah, don't do it. Just don't waste your time. Don't waste your money, man.
Cool. All right, so I read Avengers 684, which I've never talked about this book before because I've never actually read the main Avengers book. I mean, I've read it before, but it's not something that I'm currently reading. The only reason I decided to read this particular issue was because we have been talking about this a little bit here and there. They have been kind of teasing the fact that they're going to bring back the Incredible Hulk. He died in Civil War II, I believe it was, and we've talked about this before with comics, is you kind of get to the point when you read as much as we do, you kind of roll your eyes when they do stuff like this, because you know eventually, especially with these bigger characters, that eventually they're going to come back. And this particular issue of Avengers, they finally brought back the Incredible Hulk. And I am not reading this book, like I just said, so I'm not really going to talk about the main story that happens in this particular issue, because, I mean, I was kind of able to pick up kind of what was happening, but obviously I'm picking up on in a story that's so many issues into it that I'm not quite sure where I'm at with the story arc. So I'm going to kind of focus most of my attention and most of this discussion on how they brought back the Hulk. So if you're not familiar with how he died, basically he gives a special arrow tip to Hawkeye, and Hawkeye actually kills him in Civil War II, and there's a big trial and all this good stuff in that particular book. And it was one of the few things that I kind of liked in Civil War II, now that I kind of reflect back on that, but I didn't even finish it, so that tells you how much I didn't really like that particular event. And so basically, the Hulk part of this particular issue, which they kind of break it down kind of weird, because they basically give you him coming back, but then he doesn't really factor into the ongoing story too much, so that was kind of disappointing. But they bring him back in a way that is pretty disappointing. So basically, like I said, you know that they're going to bring back these big characters every time that they kill them. Like, it's no surprise to anybody that's read a comic book before that they're going to bring back the Incredible Hulk. And some of the ways that they have brought back these characters before, I mean, the Incredible Hulk has died before in comics, and they actually bring it up in this particular issue. And some of the ways that they have brought him back, or other characters back, have been goofy, but at least they've been creative. And my problem with this particular book is basically they laid out all of the ways that he has died before, and they've brought him back, and basically their excuse for bringing him back in this particular issue is just, oh, well, he's died before and he's come back, so that's just something that he does. So I was not aware that Hulk has regenerative powers, but apparently, according to this book, he does. And that's why he comes back every time, is because he just does. He just comes back. And that's basically what it boils down to, is that the fact that he dies and he comes back, and that's pretty much it. So it just felt like they were just throwing in the towel. They're like, you knew he was going to come back anyways, so why even come up with a creative way that he came back? Let's just say, oh, well, that's just what he does, and move on with it. And it just kind of bugged me a little bit, because, yeah, sometimes when they bring these characters back, I mean, most times when they bring these characters back, it just kind of feels like a dog and pony show. Like, it seems kind of silly, but at least give me the show. They just, I feel like, have just given up at this point.
Yeah, so I saw that this had come out, and this was, news on comicbook.com. Like, Marvel announces the return of the Incredible Hulk, and, I just, anymore, when I see those headlines, I laugh, and I skip over it. Like, that's not going to make me pick up the newest Avengers book. Like, as soon as he dies in Civil War II, he's coming back, and I don't know. Like, it at least used to seem like when they killed off a character, that character would be gone a little longer than what's it been, like a year, 2 years. Have it carry a little bit of weight, but I don't know. At this point, it almost seems like lazy writing. Like, yeah, I get like a character death can move the story along, but we as comic book fans are too smart now, and we know that those characters are obviously not going to stay dead, especially whenever they're big names like Bruce Banner. So it doesn't make sense from a storytelling standpoint to me anymore.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And not only does it feel like lazy writing when they kill him off, but now apparently they're getting lazy with bringing them back as well.
Yeah, which is dumb.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So our next segment is just plainly called Nerd News. Tyler compiles all the big nerd headlines that we haven't talked about since the last show, and we just discuss them. So what is Nerd News this week?
So a few stories here, a couple announcements, a trailer, yada, yada, yada. So the first one is a movie announcement, and that is a new project for the woman who directed A Wrinkle in Time, and I've never heard her name pronounced, so I'll probably fuck this one up too. But Ava DuVernay, does that sound right?
I'm not sure I've ever heard her name pronounced either.
Yeah, I don't think that that's right, but we'll go with it. Ava DuVernay. I'm sorry if I'm butchering her name because apparently she's a very talented filmmaker, but she just directed Wrinkle in Time, which is a movie that didn't really interest Pat or I, and it ended up getting beat by Black Panther at the box office, so I think it kind of come and go. But she signed up to direct a new movie for DC based on the New Gods. And the New Gods are something that I don't know a ton about. Like, the only New God I know is Darkseid. But apparently, like, it's a pretty rich, like, universe that was made by Jack Kirby. And of course, anytime you say Jack Kirby, like, you know, between him and Stan Lee, they're the gods of comics. So I think that that's pretty cool. It's something that I would like to learn more about. But I know that DC had claimed that they were moving away from trying to just make everything connected, and they were trying to do more filmmaker-based storytelling going forward. And my guess is that they said to her, "What do you want to do?" And she said, "New Gods," because I think that in a past interview she had said that was like her favorite comic book property. So yeah, I don't know. She's a good filmmaker, so we'll see what she's able to do with it. I don't know a ton about the characters besides Darkseid, so I'm curious what route they go there. But yeah, I mean, I don't have anything negative to say besides obviously the usual negative things we say about DC.
Yeah. When you mention this story, the only film that I believe I've seen of hers is 13th, which is a documentary that's currently on Netflix. I think it was actually a Netflix original documentary. It was nominated for Best documentary 2 years ago for the Oscars, and I really love that genre, so I wanted to check it out. And it's really, really an interesting, I almost said cool documentary, but it's not really cool because the subject matter is pretty shitty. But it's definitely very, very interesting documentary about how the prison system is kind of set up to screw minorities and how it's broken and all this good stuff. So yeah, it's definitely interesting if you are kind of interested in that kind of stuff. And I think, unfortunately, obviously, I'm not a fan of DC and what they're doing with their movies. I think that she could make an interesting movie, but like you said, A Wrinkle in Time didn't interest either one of us. We reviewed Tomorrowland when that came out, and this just felt like another Tomorrowland for me. I even think I mentioned that to you when you suggested us reviewing A Wrinkle in Time. I was like, that just looks like Tomorrowland 2 to me. And the critics, I believe, have been pretty critical about this movie. So I wonder if it's one of those cases where this up-and-coming director just doesn't choose her projects very well. I mean, I don't know. I'm going to say that New Gods isn't going to be very good just because I'm so biased against DC that they can't get out of their own way sometimes with these movies. So I'm going to put my money on the fact that it's not going to be a very good movie. And so she's going to have two not so great movies back to back. So we'll see if she can rebound at some point. But I love how I'm already counting this in as a bad movie. Like, we haven't even found out who's going to be writing the movie or starring in the movie, or if it's actually really, really happening. I'm already assuming that it's going to be bad.
Yeah, it should be. I want to say that she turned down Black Panther as well to do A Wrinkle in Time. I want to say she was originally attached or offered it, and then they went with Ryan Coogler when she turned it down. So that's interesting to me too. That and I don't know what her thought process there is, but yeah, we'll see. It's funny. We never talked about this in Nerd News because it wasn't really news. It was just a quote from Mark Miller, who does the Kick-Ass comics that we've talked about a few times in the last weeks. But, you know, he's written for both DC and he's written for Marvel. And one of the reasons he says that he feels like DC has not done as well as Marvel is because their characters are not as cinematic as Marvel's are. Like, they're not lended to that medium as well. And I don't know that I agree with that because obviously there were some really great Batman movies, and I'll turn in my nerd card after I say this, but I've never seen the old Superman movies, but it seems like there are a lot of people who used to love those films, so I don't know that I necessarily say that's the case, but it is an interesting concept because a lot of DC's characters are more I don't know, larger than life. And it seems like Marvel does best with its, at least starting out with its street level characters. And obviously that's evolved now, and we have like Thor, who's basically an alien god, and other characters like that. But it seems like people relate more whenever it seems like it's just an ordinary person that has these abilities and does these things. So, we would flock more to a character like Batman than we would to a character like Superman. So I don't know. I don't know that I agree with him, but it's an interesting concept.
Yeah, and if you listen to anything that Stan Lee has ever said about Marvel and what he was trying to do when they started Marvel was exactly what you just said, was to kind of make more relatable superhero characters. And that's why, and I've talked about this a million times on the podcast, that's why I always flocked to characters like Spider-Man and now The Flash, because the most recent run of The Flash, I don't know if he's always been like this, but I just now got into that character. He reminds me a lot of why I fell in love with Spider-Man, because he is kind of a relatable character. He's very similar the way that he's constructed right now. Again, I don't know how he has been in the past, but he seems very similar to Spider-Man. So that's definitely something that Marvel wanted to do and has accomplished in their history.
Why do you think there's been such a stray from secret identities in the last few years? Like we're going to talk about the new Infinity War trailer in like the next segment of Nerd News, but even at the end of that trailer, Spider-Man has his mask off and introduces himself as Peter to Doctor Strange, like no regard for his secret identity. So I've also noticed that in comic books a little bit too. Like, why do you think that we've moved away from that? Do you think it's because it's not plausible for somebody to not know who somebody is? Because that was always something that that was what piqued my interest as a kid the most was, you put on your mask and nobody knows it's you, and you do these good things and it's anonymous, heroics that you're doing. And that always spoke to me. And now it's like, it doesn't really, like the mask doesn't really matter.
I think it's just the characters evolving, and like you said, it's just not plausible in today's age to really keep stuff like that a secret. And I also think, as far as the trailer is concerned, which I'm sure we're going to get into the Infinity War trailer here in a little bit, but it seems like they have always done this with the MCU versus the comics, because Peter Parker, I'm a little bit behind on the Amazing Spider-Man comic, but he is still trying to keep his identity a secret. A few people do know who he is. Obviously, that seems like it always happens with these superheroes, but they are trying to keep it a secret, at least in the comic is concerned. But in the movies, they kind of create their own backstories and kind of create their own way of doing things. And also, he's saying it to another superhero. So I think that might play a big part in it too. But I think, like you said, it's just in today's day, you're just not going to be able to keep that stuff a secret.
Cool. So with that being said, let's move on to the Infinity War trailer. Obviously, it made a lot of news this week, and a lot of people were gushing over it, rightfully so, because it looks amazing. But yeah, what'd you think?
Well, I actually did watch it, so that's a start for me, at least. I think that this movie is gonna be amazing. Like, I cannot wait. They've been building it so well. I am a little bit nervous that there's gonna be too much going on. Like, there's gonna be too much stimulation during this movie. I think that Marvel should get the benefit of the doubt, and will definitely get the benefit of the doubt that they can pull it off. But I am a little bit nervous about that. But we've been waiting so long to get Thanos, or Stone Cold Steve Austin as Thanos. But yeah, it's just I'm definitely intrigued by this movie for sure, and I'm looking forward to the Captain America v Thanos thing. That looks pretty badass, and just the whole thing looks amazing.
So one thing I do want to touch on about the trailer, because this is like the biggest thing going on right now with the internet, and like memes are being made and fake posters are being made, but there was a noticeable lack of Hawkeye, which people are upset about. There was a noticeable lack of Nick Fury, and there was a noticeable lack of Ant-Man. So I saw this amazing fan poster, which was basically, it was the poster that they just put out with all the characters on it, but instead of all the characters, it was Ant-Man and Hawkeye hugging each other. with Nick Fury down in the bottom. So that was pretty funny. But do you think that Hawkeye might not even be in this movie?
I think that he will eventually be in the movie. Like, I don't think that he's definitely not going to be prominent in the movie. But I think when you have this big event, because essentially he's retired pretty much for the most part. But I think when you have this huge event, I don't think you can still be retired. Like we saw in Civil War. Like, he comes out of retirement when shit really hits the fan. So I don't think you can stay retired, and what's going to happen is happening. So I definitely think he's going to be in the movie to a certain extent, but there's so many other characters that are going to be in this movie. I think, obviously, Black Panther is going to play a much more prominent role. I mean, he already played a prominent role in Civil War, but I think that he's going to definitely be in the forefront of this movie, and there's just not enough characters and not enough time to go around to give every single one of these Avengers just enough screen time.
Well, what's interesting is, that on that poster, like they normally do, there's, credits on there, like of all the people that are in this movie, and Jeremy Renner's name is not on there. Peter Dinklage's name is on there, which confirms that he's in the movie in some role, which we don't know, but no Jeremy Renner. So I'm curious if he dies at the beginning, or if, he's retired, like you said, and, plays a bigger part in the Avengers movie that comes out next year.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, but like I said, there's so many characters, man.
Yeah.
And I honestly, I like Hawkeye as kind of like a side character. He's a cool character because he doesn't really have any superpowers. He's just this guy that's really good at what he does. So I think that's pretty cool. But he wasn't ever my favorite Avenger to begin with. So not just in the comics, but also in the movies. So I'm not too upset by this.
Cool. So the last piece of nerd news I have is regarding Happy Death Day, which we talked about last year, either for what one of us was into or we actually reviewed it. I don't remember. But apparently, not only is it getting a sequel, but it could start filming as soon as May, which is crazy to me because I think that movie came out in September or October. So
I thought it was earlier than that. Like, I thought it was like one of those early movies, but I could be completely wrong. You might actually be right because it just came out on Blu-ray not too long ago, so that would make sense that it came out like September or October.
I'm glad that you were able to figure that one out on your own. Like you went through like the whole process there.
Yeah, you heard the whole thing while I was talking. You could probably hear on the recording the wheels turning in my head. But
it came out October 13th of last year, for what it's worth.
Yeah, because it was something that I watched for Shocktober. That is right. Now, as far as the sequel is concerned, I'm not surprised. I am a little disappointed because certain movies just work well on their own. But with horror movies, they are so cheap to make and they generally do fairly well at the box office. And because they're so cheap, they don't have to hit the threshold that these big blockbusters do to warrant a sequel. So the fact that they're doing a sequel makes sense to me from a business standpoint, but as far as like a story standpoint, it's a little disappointing because what can you do? I'm sure there's plenty that they're going to be able to do, but is it going to be as good as the first one? Because I think the first one, the charm of that movie is the fact that I thought it was going to be really stupid and it ended up being pretty well done and pretty fun. As fun as a movie watching a woman getting murdered over and over again can be. So I don't know if you can necessarily replicate that.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that Blumhouse just needs to thank their lucky stars that they captured lightning in a bottle once with that movie, because I think everybody was pretty much in agreement that it looked pretty bad. And when it ended up being really good and really fun, a lot of people were surprised. But I don't know that you can replicate that, especially if you use the same characters again. So I'm curious to see what they do here, but I don't know. I guess whether we want it or not, it's coming, and I'm sure both of us will see it. So why even have an opinion? Cool, man. That's all I have for nerd news.
All right. So the next segment is just plainly called the main topic. It changes from episode to episode. We're kind of getting back into the swing of reviewing a movie every episode, and so we're going to continue to do that. Tomb Raider came out this past Friday, which of course this film is based on the series of video games, most notably the recent reboot of that franchise, that video game franchise. It was directed by, and there's absolutely no way that I'm going to pronounce his name right, Roar Youthhog. No way. There's absolutely no way that I pronounce that correctly. He's a Norwegian filmmaker. I couldn't even pronounce the country that he's from. And this muvi stars Alicia Vikander, which I'm like in my own head about pronouncing these names now because I butchered his name so bad. She stars as Lara Croft, who is an adventurer estranged from her family who must sail to a deserted island to discover what really happened to her father. God, I am so like in my head right now.
Did you just forget how to talk?
I just had a stroke. I need to call an ambulance for sure. But anyways, we have talked about this plenty of times on the podcast. This is something that I feel very strongly about, that we kind of need to get away from as nerds. But video game movies just don't really work all that well. It's really hard to make a good video game movie, I think, for two reasons. One, it's just almost impossible to replicate the experience of playing a video game. Like, it's impossible to do that unless we eventually get to the point where they make like VR movies that you can actually participate, but then that's just a video game. So I don't know how they're going to go about legitimately replicating the experience of playing a video game. And the second reason it's really hard is because for the most part, video game stories aren't as good as movies. Like, the guys that make video games don't pay as much of attention on the story than the other aspects, because it's so hard to make a good video game that doesn't have bugs and glitches and stuff like that, and the gameplay plays smoothly, that they don't pay as much of attention to the story. That's all movies are stories. So if you don't have a solid story, then you have no movie whatsoever. And I think that's the problem, is that they make these movies based on these video games that don't have solid stories to begin with, and that's all you have as a movie. So I think that's another reason why they don't really work that well. All of that being said, I was kind of excited to see this movie just because I only played the first one. I haven't played Rise of the Tomb Raider yet, but I really, really enjoyed that first rebooted game of the franchise, and they actually just recently announced that they're making the third one soon. So, or they've already made it and it's coming out, I think, in October or September, something like that. So I'm definitely excited for that. I definitely need to get Rise of the Tomb Raider out of the way first. But I was somewhat excited, surprisingly, to see this movie.
Yeah, I mean, I was excited as well. Obviously, we did a Rotten Tomatoes film draft at the beginning of the year, and I didn't take this super early, but when I did take it, I spoke to being excited for it because obviously it looked like it could follow in the steps of movies like Wonder Woman, with a very strong female character at the forefront. And yeah, I was definitely looking forward to it. I, like you, really enjoyed the first of this rebooted Tomb Raider universe game. So I definitely want to play Rise of the Tomb Raider very soon after seeing this movie and kind of, recharging my interest in the Tomb Raider franchise. But I had pretty decent hopes for it.
All right, so jumping right into the review, we break down our reviews very similar to how we break down an episode of the podcast into segments. And the first segment is just kind of a general overview of how we felt about the film or whatever we're reviewing. And then we'll kind of go into detail as we go along in the review. We call this first segment Broad Strokes. So how'd you feel about Tomb Raider?
I didn't dislike this movie. In fact, parts of it were fun. However, I definitely have issues with this film for sure, and I've had a hard time putting my finger on what it is that made it feel so mediocre. I think it comes down to pacing issues and other things I'll talk about in the story, but overall, it felt a lot flatter than it should have. Like, this was presented as kind of like a globe-trotting epic, and there are just parts of the movie where there's no weight to it at all.
So we've talked about how, I mean, obviously we're good friends and we think pretty similarly on a lot of things, and that obviously that's why we're good friends. But sometimes I think that you know my password to my Evernote and just steal my notes because we are completely in sync on this movie. It was really hard for me to prep for this movie. A lot of times when I take notes, I don't take very many notes about most things on the podcast, but when we kind of review a movie, I think it's important that I do take a few notes just because there's stuff that I really want to bring up while we're reviewing it. For this movie, it was kind of hard for me to take a ton of notes on it because when we're reviewing something, it's usually I feel pretty passionate about how good this movie was, or I feel pretty passionate about how bad it was and how pissed I am that I spent money to see this movie, and the words just kind of flow out. Well, with this particular movie, I felt so much just like indifference to this movie. Like I was just like, how am I supposed to write anything interesting about it? Because I don't really feel like it was that interesting to begin with. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's a remake of a film franchise that was based on a video game franchise that also got remade, and that reboot inspired this film. And I just feel like when you're making a film that has so much history, you have to do something to make it your own. And I don't think that this movie ever wanted to do that. It wanted to play it so safe. And I just think that made a really, really boring movie because it felt like we were watching the cutscenes of the first Tomb Raider movie or the first Tomb Raider reboot video game. And I mean, I just wanted to play the game again, and I wasn't really paying attention to the movie because it never really captured my attention.
Yeah, I will preface this review with saying that I've never seen the original Tomb Raider movies with Angelina Jolie. Honestly, like, I didn't go into this movie thinking about those movies, because to me, this movie should be a completely different entity from those movies because it's based on a different franchise of games. I mean, well, I guess same franchise, but a completely different feel. Like, you know, she's not wearing short shorts and a tight blue top that shows off her figure. She's
her triangle boobies.
Yeah, her triangle boobies. No, I mean, it's a completely different empowerment with Lara Croft in this new generation. And so I didn't even think about like the Angelina Jolie movies going into this, but apparently, you know, that's an easy comparison for a lot of critics to make. I was reading a few of the reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, and it seems like those series of movies came up quite a bit, which I think is unfair to this movie. But yeah, I definitely agree with what you said within broad strokes. It's very harmless filmmaking, which can be good, but can also result in something that, you know, it sounds like we're both pretty indifferent to.
Yeah, for sure. So our next segment in our reviews is just we break down the story. And again, it was really hard for me to break down the story because I just didn't really get into it at all. And obviously that tells you a lot about how I feel about this movie and how the story kind of goes. So just jumping right into it, the Premium Rush 2 stuff felt really fucking stupid and forced. Like when she just this bike carrier just like riding their bike around the streets, whatever. I guess they're in London. I don't know where they're at. It just felt like it was an excuse for this film to have action at the very beginning, and it was really, really stupid. Yeah, I really hated that little first bit. And then unfortunately, once it gets going, because it doesn't take very long to get going, if you've played the games before or if you've seen any other action adventure movie before, you know exactly where it's going. Not only that, but it felt, especially when the movie starts to really get going, when they're at the island, it felt like a lot of this movie was left on the cutting room floor. There's stuff that they mentioned here and there that I'm just like, what? Wait, I mean, I missed that. Like, I can't remember what his name, is it Daniel Wu's character? Is that his name? The ship captain. I can't remember the guy's name. I mean, I don't know his character's name. Yes. He mentioned something about how Walter Goggins' character shoots his dad, And then they have these other prisoners that are just like, oh, well, your dad sacrificed himself to save us. I'm like, where did that fucking come from? Did we see that? Did they mention that before? Like, I don't know. It felt like a lot of things were left on the cutting room floor. I'd be interested to see some of the deleted scenes in this movie. And I had a very similar reaction to the story that you kind of mentioned briefly in broad strokes. Is this definitely has a serious pacing problem. The story slows way down at times, and then it's just like they snort a line of crack and it just goes into this like epic action scene, and I just don't care because it just kind of goes back and forth, and it's just very uneven storytelling. And I was really excited. I know I'm kind of jumping around. I'm just going to get all my thoughts out right off the bat. I think Walter Goggins' character was basically just a shell of a character and a waste of a really good actor. We've talked a lot about Justified past episodes. I think we actually gave it kind of like a series review when it finished a few years ago, and we just praised him for his portrayal of what is it? Is it Boyd?
Boyd Crowder.
Yeah, Boyd. Yeah. So he's just an amazing actor, and I just think that he wasn't given enough material to work with. It was a waste of a really good actor because he never really got to do anything all that exciting or all that noteworthy. And he never really was developed a whole lot. And I know we talk about that sort of thing a lot on this podcast, but it's very important. Like, he mentions his family, but it never really actually carries any weight. So yeah, I was pretty disappointed with his character. And then, of course, the twist at the very end was really fucking stupid and pretty heavy-handed. And if you didn't see it coming, then this must be the first movie you've ever seen before.
Yeah, so I think that I disagree with a little of what you said. For me, I was really digging this movie through the first hour. In that first hour where, it pretty much predominantly takes place in London, it seemed larger scale. Like it was going to be a larger scale movie. It reminded me of like the globetrotting that takes place in like the most recent 007 movies. And I thought that the first hour introduced Lara really well. And it was starting to feel like this movie could possibly transcend other video game movies. However, in my opinion, once they get to the island, things start to feel too convenient. The movie decreases in scale pretty quick, and the story loses a lot of momentum, in my opinion. I think that the suspense factor takes a dive, and just when things should be picking up, because we've kind of gotten to the place where most of the movie is going to take place, like I said, it should be picking up. It shouldn't start to feel stale, which is what it did. It turns into a series of situations instead of concrete storytelling, which is really disappointing to me. Nothing on the island seemed like it was there for story purposes. It seems like it was just there to put Lara in some weird situation that she had to Tomb Raid herself out of, and that was disappointing to me. And that idea may work in a video game, but movies don't have that luxury because we're not playing as that character. So I think that there was definitely some storytelling that they could have done there that would have been more effective. Things also get pretty predictable, like you said, especially like at the final half hour of the movie. And instead of doing anything fresh, the story just seems to kind of go through the motions. And the one thing I will say that I did appreciate about the story is that it was grounded in some type of reality. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff that happens in this movie that wouldn't happen in the real world, but I appreciate that there were no magical tombs here. And yes. I think that if things got supernatural, it would have been pretty cringeworthy. So I was happy whenever we got to like the climax of the movie, that wasn't the case. Still not something that it would necessarily happen in real life, but not like, a mummy came to life or anything like that in the final moments of the movie, which I appreciated. So they definitely didn't jump the shark there. I just think that there was definitely some story punch-ups that they should have done once we got to the island. The villain was super weak. Like you said, Walton Goggins, like we'll get to him in performances. Like I have some stuff to say about him in performances, but I never really felt like he was menacing. Like there's one thing in the movie he does that seems pretty villainous, but besides that, like I kind of resonate with what he's trying to do. Like he's been stuck on this island for 7 years trying to get home to his family. So I kind of felt sympathetic for him. Like he's been stuck on this island just like everybody else, and sure he's being a dick, but he just wants to get home and see his girls, which is what he tells Lara. So he didn't seem all that villainous to me. I mean, there's a few moments where he does something pretty terrible, but I think that there's definitely more you could do with him as an actor to create him a more villainous character, because we've seen him do it before.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm glad that you brought up the fact that it doesn't get really like supernatural at the end. Like it does stay somewhat grounded towards the end, which I really appreciate. There's actually literally a jump scare in this movie that they actually mention that it's just like all smoke and mirrors is, I think, exactly what they say. And so I really appreciated that they did keep this movie as grounded as you can make this weird movie. I think that they did a pretty good job there, and so you definitely need to give it credit where credit's due, because I think sometimes, we've talked about this before, our reviews end up skewing towards the negative when we dislike something. But yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Cool. So you ready for performances?
Yeah, what'd you think?
So again, like kind of what I started off my broad strokes with, I did not hate this movie. I was definitely disappointed with where the story went for the most part, but I think that the performance of Alicia Vikander is what kept me bought in. I thought that she was really, really great as Lara Croft, and obviously she's an Academy Award-winning actress, and she knows her stuff, and I thought that she did a fantastic job. Walton Goggins, I mentioned his villain being pretty one-dimensional and honestly not all that villainous. And so I don't know that I necessarily blame it on him, but he definitely seemed to be phoning it in this movie and kind of just doing the motions. I mean, we've all seen him give amazing performances in the past, and I just kind of think in this movie he was just there. Like maybe it's a mortgage payment or whatever. Dominic West was fine. I think that he's a little too creepy to be like the sympathetic father figure, because I don't know, I just think of him in Punisher Warzone and being Jigsaw, and I don't know, his face is kind of creepy, so I don't know if he was the best choice to play her father in this movie. But the other thing I would say that would have made this movie a lot better would be more Nick Frost. Like I was so excited to see him show up, and of course he just has like one scene in the movie and then a scene at the end of the movie, and I don't know why he doesn't get more work, because he's funny, he's charming, like I think he's a great comedic actor, and I wish that he would have like been her sidekick on this trip or something instead of like a scummy pawn shop owner, because I think that he could have brought some levity to the rest of the film. Yeah,
that's another good point, because there's not a ton of charisma in this movie or chemistry between characters in this movie, but some of the few scenes that are in this movie that actually felt like a real conversation and the characters actually had some chemistry were the two scenes with Nick Frost in. So I definitely appreciate that you brought that up. Yeah, he was great in this movie, and I'm surprised that, like you said, he doesn't get more work than he does. I thought she was awesome as Lara Croft. I'm not going to try to say her name again because I would prefer not to have another stroke. But I think she's too good for this mediocre material. Like I think she did what you would expect. Like she did well with the material, but I mean the movie just kind of let her down. And I think the same thing with Walton Goggins. God damn it! What is my deal today with names? I think I actually called him Walter at one point earlier in the episode, so I apologize for that. But I think that he. I mean, I completely agree with you that he was trying. I think he was trying to bring Boyd, but he just wasn't into it. I think that he was definitely kind of. I wouldn't necessarily say phoning it in, because I think that he was trying at certain points, but he wasn't given the material to work with. And then Dominic West, like he just, I don't know what happened to him. Like he was in The Wire, man. Like he was really good in that show, and then he's in this movie where he barely gets to do anything. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know what happened to him in his career, but yeah, he was pretty disappointing in this movie as well.
Awesome.
Our last segment is just action. So there wasn't a ton. Well, I mean, I guess there was plenty. I just wasn't all that interested in it. I feel like there was just lots of shots of her running, and she runs kind of weird for me in this movie. Like, if you see her running in the trailer with the bow and arrow, that's pretty much 75% of this action in this movie is not necessarily just that scene, but it's just shots of her running through shit. And so I thought that was kind of disappointing.
Yeah, so this is a part where I disagreed with you in story. It didn't sound like you liked the bike chase because it reminded you of Premium Rush, even though that movie has your boy the Hyphen in it.
That's the only reason I ever fucking watched that movie, and I was disappointed in it. I was like, why did you do this movie?
No, I've never seen that movie, to be honest. But I thought that there were some cool moments with the action. I felt myself liking the bike chase and the foot chase in Hong Kong on the docks more than anything that happens on the island, though. I thought that there was more suspense in those situations than there ever were on the island. So that's what was disappointing for me, because obviously the island is where the majority of the quote-unquote action takes place. But I wasn't as bought in with any of that, just because, like I said in my story synopsis, like I felt like that's when things slowed down quite a bit in this movie, which was disappointing.
Yeah, for sure. And I think for me, the bike stuff, and maybe it's just because I'm so jaded when it comes to stuff like this, or most things in general, but I think you just know that she's going to run into something. She's going to get distracted and she's going to run into something. And that's exactly what happened. And I was just waiting the whole time for that to happen, because you knew that was what was going to be the end game of that scene. So I was a little bit disappointed in that. And honestly, a lot of the stuff on the island just reminded me of how fun the game was. And it just kind of took me out of the movie, because I was thinking, I don't care about what's happening on screen here. It just reminded me how cool the movie was. Or I'm sorry, the video game was.
Yeah, I mean, I will definitely say most of the time that's spent on the island, my whole thought process was, man, I need to play Rise of the Tomb Raider.
Yeah, for sure.
No, I agree. I agree for sure.
All right, so let's put a cherry on top of this review and give it a star rating. So out of 5 stars, what do you think of Tomb Raider?
So this might be kind of surprising, given, I feel like anytime we review a movie, even if it's a movie we like, we talk about all the negative stuff more. But I think that this movie has some qualities to it that make it watchable. So I'm going to give it a soft 3, because I don't not recommend it. It's a harmless movie for families to go see, or families to watch when it's out on home video. Like, it's not changing the world or anything. And there's definitely things I wish that I liked more about it, but I wouldn't not recommend it to somebody. So 3 for me.
Yeah, I think that it's one of those movies, and we've touched on this before, like when we're editing the podcast or whatever, like neither one of us do a ton of editing. It's more like we just listen to it to make sure that it sounds all right. There's nothing weird background noise or something like that. And so we will both have something like playing in the background. Like I'll be sitting in the kitchen, I'll have my iPod or my iPad like playing The Office or something, so I have something to distract me while I'm editing. And I think this movie is kind of the perfect background noise. So I guess I would recommend it in that sense. I would definitely not say go out and see it in theater and pay money for it. Maybe if you have the movie pass and you're bored, go see it. But for the most part, I would definitely say skip it in the theaters, wait for it to be on Netflix or something like that, and give it 2 hours and not really pay too much attention to it, because it's not going to really keep your attention for sure. Like have something that you're doing, maybe cleaning your house or something. It's definitely perfect background noise. So I can't give it a 3 for that. I'm going to give it a 2.5, because it's not necessarily a bad movie. I think it's well put together. It's well acted in certain spots, but the story definitely leaves much to be desired.
Awesome. Cool.
All right, so the last little segment at the of the end of these episodes is Nerd Favorite. We ask each other what your favorite blank is, whatever the topic is that week, and we take turns picking the topic. It is my week, and I'm going to cheat a little bit. I think we've already done favorite video game movie, so I don't want to obviously retread on that topic. So I'm going to change it a little bit. It's not really going to be a nerd favorite, but I'm going to ask you what video game you'd like to see be made into a movie. And I know I'm going to kind of talk out of both sides of my mouth because when we started our Tomb Raider review, I mentioned that it's hard to replicate that experience. And I'm kind of tired of video game being made into movies. But I thought it'd be kind of an interesting question because there are a lot of great video game franchises out there that they haven't tried already. And my first instinct when I thought about this question was to kind of take my two favorite franchises, and those are Halo and Madden. Well, Madden obviously is based on the NFL, so you can't really do that because we already have that. And Halo, I love Halo not because of the story. Like, I do enjoy the mythology and I do enjoy the campaigns to a certain extent, but it's all about the multiplayer for me. That was basically my entire college experience, was going to class and playing Halo. So I don't really love those games for the story so much. So I don't really necessarily think that that's a very good choice either. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Steven Spielberg is trying to make a TV series or at least a mini series on Showtime for the Halo franchise. So I think it's already going to kind of get the movie treatment, so to speak. So the game that I would love to see made into a movie, because you have to pick a game that has a really great story, that has risen above the genre as far as that's concerned. And for me, the choice is pretty easy. It's BioShock. What really blew me away, that game is fun in its own way, but the story is just so amazing. And I think that if you can get a really good writer to expand on that story, because it's a great story as video games are concerned, but it definitely has some polishing that could be done there as far as the story is concerned. So I think if you get a really, really established movie or TV writer to do a screenplay of this game, I think they could really just completely rise above the genre. I think that there's a really cool movie that could be made in this like steampunk post-apocalyptic world. And I would be really excited to see it.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. This is a tough one for sure, because obviously not a great track record with video game movies. But I think I'm going to go with Red Dead Redemption. But not so much Red Dead Redemption, because obviously there's a million Western movies out there, so you can say what you will about that. But I'm going to go even more specific and say Undead Nightmare, which was the expansion on Red Dead Redemption, like the bonus pack where it turns into a zombie game. And, you know, the zombie genre is pretty tired and the Western genre is pretty tired, but I think that there's a fun movie to be made with a zombie Western. And I'm sure there's a zombie Western out there somewhere, but the way that game does it is done so well. Like, you know, the Southwest, like on the border of Mexico, and the things that cause the zombies to come to life. And, you know, your main character becomes a zombie at one point. And I don't know. I think that there's some fun storytelling to be done there. And, you know, if I'd been given more time to think about it, maybe I could have come up with a better answer. But, you know, that's a movie I'd watch for sure.
Yeah, actually, Red Dead Redemption came to mind when I thought of this question. And I kind of had the same thought process. I was like, well, if you just take away the video game aspect of it, it's just a Western, and we've had plenty of Westerns. So, yeah, I kind of like your idea of making it the Undead Nightmare version of that game, because that does kind of give a twist to the way that they would do that movie. So, yeah, that's a good call.
Awesome, man.
All right, so that's it for, I believe this is episode 181 of the Nerds You're Looking For podcast. As always, we'd appreciate if you subscribe, rate, review us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, basically any good podcatcher you use, we're probably on it. Our website is thenerdspodcast.com. You can check out a lot of things. It's kind of the hub for the nerds you're looking for. So definitely check that out. Comment and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also check us out on Twitch and Mixer. I've been streaming on all three recently, and it's been a lot of fun. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram. They're both at The Nerds Podcast. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Google+. Email us at thenerdsyou'relooking4@gmail.com. And finally, vote for us for Podcast of the Month at podcastland.com. For Patrick Kuhn,
Tyler Hunt.
we are The Nerds You're Looking For. Take it easy, guys.
Later, guys.